Good evening, welcome. My name is Jen Zane. I am the communications coordinator for the Michigan Collaborative to End Mass Incarceration. Welcome you here tonight. We will go through a quick welcome. We will run through our presentation. We'll have a Q&A session, and then we'll leave some time at the end for announcements, and welcome those of you that have any announcements to please bring those forward at that time. Next slide. Well, MI-CEMI is a group of 115 member organizations that are across the state that are working in all sorts of areas from advocacy to legal. They are reformists, abolitionists, they're faith-based. And we also have individual members like some of you that are on the call tonight, as well as our incarcerated population that are here with some of us in our hearts. What we do is we work to support those organizations, those folks that are on the front lines advocating to improve public safety and to end mass incarceration in Michigan. And we know that as a group, collaboratively, we can accomplish so much more together than any of us can accomplish on our own. Next slide. So MI-CEMI is working on several projects across a few areas here that I'll just briefly touch on. The first being incarceration prevention. We coordinate a learning community of groups that work on restorative justice, violence prevention, police accountability, and we host a monthly meeting for that. Additionally, we work on sentence reform, supporting efforts to reduce length of stay, and right now really working to uplift and convene the Second Look Coalition. Additionally, we work in programming by supporting college access and training peer GED tutors. We have a convening coming up to convene our folks across the state that are working in programming, and we look forward to inviting all of you to that when that day comes. Additionally, we're working in reentry. We want to make sure that folks that are coming home from prison have everything they need to start their lives over and to reenter successfully. So we're working to advance policies for vital documents. We're working in narrative change. We have a communications convening coming up. We have resources we've created, such as our language glossary and messaging resources as well. And we're working in reinvestment in our budget advocacy work with organizations across the state. Next slide. So I want to invite you to a few events that are coming up in May. The first is called our Strategic Communications in Criminal Legal Reform. This is where we're inviting our communications leaders, those that are updating websites, managing social media pages, writing press releases, to join other communication leaders to learn pro tips on social media, paid and organic, as well as to have a deeper discussion on what a communications table would look like if we convened one statewide. What support do we all need, and what can we do to collaboratively get there together? That convening is going to be on Tuesday, May the 7th at 11 a.m. And the registration is there on the slide. It's bit.ly/join us May 7th. The other event that we have is with Michigan Megaphone. It's a training to learn about Michigan Megaphone's platform and how we can utilize that to better engage on social media. After their presentation, we'll engage in a content brainstorming session where we'll learn what issues each of us are working on and how we can better create content to engage our followers. That event is going to be on Tuesday, May 21st at 7 p.m. And the registration for that will go out similarly to this one in our monthly newsletter emails, our targeted emails, as well as our social media platforms. So we encourage you all, if you're not already, to please join, become a member of MI-CEMI, and you'll get those updates and invitations as they come out. You can scan that QR code or visit that website. Only takes a few moments, there's no fee, and we would love to have you join the community. Well, I don't want to hold this up any longer. Oh, sorry, one more, back up. After today's session, we're encouraging you to share your feedback. Please send any feedback you have to mail@miscemi.org and mark your calendar. We'll have another meeting July 25th, similar to this one, with a topic to be determined. So we know that these issues are important to all of us. And we've all come across a time when we're trying to push a policy forward and we're frustrated because there's someone saying, that they need to be tough on crime, trying to score political points, and interrupt a narrative that is good for the community. Vera Action has done the polling to learn how to effectively counter these messages. And I'd like to introduce to you our main presenter tonight, Insha Rahman, Vice President for Advocacy and Partnerships at the Vera Institute of Justice and Director of Vera Action, which is Vera's 501c4 sister organization. She leads the development of Vera and Vera Advocacy's priorities and campaigns across the organization, partners with governments and communities to end mass incarceration, fight for immigrant rights, ensure dignity behind bars, and to build safe, thriving communities for all. Over the past year, she has spearheaded a national effort to win the narrative on safety, accountability, and justice, and to counter the tough on crime rhetoric, especially during election times. Prior to joining Vera, she was a public defender at the Bronx Defenders. She graduated with a BA in Africana Studies from Vassar College, and she earned her JD from the City University of New York School of Law. Insha, we welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen and the MI-CEMI team for hosting this. And thank you to all of you who are tuning in on a Thursday night to hear a little bit. And I hope this is hopeful for all of us of how we can actually counter tough on crime rhetoric and frankly, the racialized dog whistles when we talk about ending mass incarceration and what it actually means to build safe, thriving communities. And I'm going to share my screen and would love, Jen, if you can let me know. Can everybody see this okay? Yep, thanks, Chuck. I see your hands up, your thumbs up. So as Jen said, we're going to talk about how do we win the narrative on safety, accountability, and justice. And really, this is about changing the debate from tough or soft on crime, which is where the debate often lies, not with us, not all of us who care about justice reform, but with the folks in power who are trying to influence to take on good policy. And there's actually a way through that. And it's not to have the debate of tough or soft on crime, but to change the narrative to we can be serious about safety. And there are three values that everybody across the political spectrum cares about, which is safety, accountability, and justice. So this is part of a national effort that we at Vera Action, the C4 of the Vera Institute of Justice, have taken on in the past year and a half. And in 2024, it feels especially relevant because all of us are staring down a really consequential election in November and a lot of work to be done, you know, before then and after then. And many of us in state houses, in local government conversations, we are hearing, well, I hear you on the policy, but we can't do that because of the politics. Well, in fact, we can. And we've been doing polling and message testing to figure out how exactly we move folks from saying, no, we can't on the politics to saying, yes, we can. So I'm going to present for about 30 minutes, going to share a bunch of information. I really welcome this to be a conversation. So please put things in the chat and there'll be plenty of time for Q&A and discussion after. Really looking forward to this. So I think it's always really important to start any conversation we have about the politics around mass incarceration and tough on crime with going back to 1988. And some of you might be old enough to remember the Willie Horton ad in the 1988 presidential race. And I'm going to play it for us because it's just a really good reminder of how potent tough on crime rhetoric is. And then I'm going to show you something from just 2 years ago, the midterm election cycle, where you'll see Willie Horton, tough on crime. It's still incredibly present in our public narrative, in our political narrative. So let's start here.
Bush and Dukakis on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
So sometimes when I say in my conversations with legislators, like that Willie Horton rhetoric, and they're like, we're not still in 1988 and Willie Horton, like we've evolved since then. So Anytime that gets said to us, I like to remind people of this video, New York, the gubernatorial race 2022. Here you go. And I'm just going to warn folks that it's a little violent, so it's actually age restricted on YouTube, and you got to sort of like go in to see it. Here you go.
There's no question that this fear of crime is real. Then without warning, he turns violent and continues.
You're looking at actual violent crimes caught on camera in Kathy Hochul's New York. And it's getting much worse. On Kathy Hochul's watch. On November 8th, vote like your life depends on it. It just might. Lee Zeldin for governor. Because it's time our families feel safe again.
So incredibly ugly, but that is what so much of the rhetoric still is on the political cycle, and certainly, as elections come up. And here's the thing is, though, even though the political playbook on crime feels stuck in 1988, what we know is that American people have evolved. And in the 3 decades since the Willie Horton ad first came out, what we have seen is the rise of mass incarceration, over 2 million people behind bars. Nearly 1 in every 2 people in this country have experienced the inside of a jail or prison cell, either themselves or through a loved one. We've seen Ferguson, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. What we've also seen is the rise of reform, bipartisan reform, real steps taken to make this country more free, more safe, more just. And so when our politicians say we can't move stuff because of tough on crime politics and tough on crime rhetoric, what we know is we actually can, because while the political playbook might be 30 years old, that is actually not where Americans are today. And what we have seen on the right-hand side of this slide is a number of examples of where politicians and policies have actually defeated tough on crime scare tactics. And it's because they didn't do what often Democrats, but also Republicans, but mostly Democrats do when being attacked for being soft on crime. They didn't duck and run away, and they didn't run to the right and basically adopt, no, I too am tough on crime, I'm tougher than you. What they did, these politicians and these policy wins, is they said, we can be serious about safety, we can have accountability, we can have justice. And let me give you a few examples. John Fetterman ran in the 2022 congressional cycle. We all know he won, U.S. Senate. What I think is a more sort of untold story there is the GOP spent over $10 million attacking him for being quote unquote soft on crime. He didn't run away. He didn't run to the right on this issue. He actually leaned in and said, I'm a Democrat. I'm running on my record on crime. I'm serious about safety. We can own safety and justice. And so when he was attacked for granting clemency, he actually, as lieutenant governor, he granted more clemencies than any other lieutenant governor in recent Pennsylvania history. He actually ran an ad explaining what clemency is and featuring 2 men that he had granted clemency to. And what we saw at the end of the 2022 cycle is when you look at Pennsylvania exit surveys, 11% of Pennsylvania voters said crime is my top voting issue. 51 to 49, they voted for John Fetterman over his opponent. He actually neutralized on an issue that historically Democrats have been seen as soft on. In 2023, we see Brandon Johnson, mayor of Chicago, ran on a serious about safety message in a much more purple district. Jacksonville, Florida, Donna Deegan also ran on a serious about safety message and won. Then we've seen things like Illinois bail reform, which went into effect in 2023, a ton of fear-mongering around it, and yet all of the politicians who voted for bail reform, who championed it, when the attack started, they didn't run away, but in fact, they leaned in and said, no, we can be serious about safety, we can have safety and justice. They explained why bail reform mattered. And what we saw again after that political cycle in 2022, which is when the real fear-mongering around the reform started, actually, Illinois voters were like, I feel neutral or favorable towards the law, 60%, even after a lot of fear-mongering in the midterm campaign cycle. Those are just a few examples, and I share them to make concrete this data that I'm about to share with you, to be like, well, that's the test tube of research. What does this look like in real life? There are many good examples, and what I'm hoping we can do collectively is create some more examples in 2024 in this big election year. So let me just say a few words about the work that we are doing nationally. So I met Vera, the Institute of Justice. I'm the Vice President of Advocacy and Partnerships. I'm the Director of Vera Action, RC4. And 2 years ago, we undertook this 10-year effort to have the kind of narrative change we need to end racialized tough on crime rhetoric and neutralize the politics of mass incarceration. And we have now done over 15 rounds of national polling, state-specific polling. So in addition to the Michigan data I'm going to share with you all tonight, we've done polling in Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York, California. We've got a bunch more polling that we're doing, as well as polling on specific issues like prosecutors or how to talk about policing and defund, bail reform, youth justice, a number of other issue areas. And so using all of this polling and public opinion research, we're taking on basically 4 things. The first is through our 501c4 doing political outreach. So talking to candidates, campaigns, the PACs and the money that surround them, consultants, as well as state and local legislators. We spent a day in Lansing a couple of weeks ago talking to both legislators on the Democratic side as well as legislators on the Republican side and sharing this information, as well as doing a top-down approach of talking to the state party chair, Chair Lavora Barnes, as well as a ground-up approach, which I'll get to in a second, of sort of field organizing. So the second thing we're doing is a lot of organizing with our field, and that looks like talking to in Michigan, sort of a lot of you, folks like Michigan, Detroit Action and Michigan United, a number of other organizations, to make sure that language about how we own safety and justice is part of canvassing work, all the work that's going to happen on the doors this year. So the third thing we do is media outreach. We know that so much of people's perceptions of crime and safety are shaped by what they see on the news, what they read. And so we want to make sure we are helping reporters actually tell accurate, thoughtful stories about crime and safety. And in Michigan just recently, we've seen a lot of really great pieces come out about the drop in gun violence, especially in Detroit. Last year, Detroit hit the lowest number of homicides and shootings in 57 years. That is a cause for celebration. And as opposed to letting that narrative be, well, it was a whole lot of investment in police and more prosecution and everything else. In fact, making it a story about it was an investment in community-driven solutions for safety, like community violence intervention, more programs, et cetera. The fourth part is digital. We have a social influencer program that we're running to make sure that where people are getting their information, especially people in this country who are under 40 years old, it's on TikTok, it's on Instagram, and we've been focused on reaching, especially in this election cycle through 2024, white women and Black women, because we found in our research that they are most moved by issues of crime and safety and most willing to go vote and take action on it as well. So here's where we're working in 2024, just to get a sense of the larger picture, and then we'll zoom into Michigan. It's the 7 battleground states, so Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and then 2 other states, New York and California, that are a battleground, at least for control of the US House, but also it's 2 places where the crime narrative is on overdrive, and it's really important to make sure we can turn the politics there. And the reason the battleground states are so important in 2024 is we know that the tough on crime rhetoric and the soft on crime attacks don't land evenly over the country. They land in the races that matter most for electoral politics. Michigan is one of those places, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania is as well. So that's why we're really focusing on these 9 states altogether this year. So let's turn to Michigan, and thanks for humoring me and sort of a little bit of background and context. I hope it's helpful to understand the research we're going to share now, and also really engage you all in talking through strategy of how is this helpful, how can it be used in the everyday advocacy and policy and organizing work that you all do. So it's really important to start this with a note where we do national research as well as state-specific research, and one of the really important findings in Michigan is, in general, Michiganders are not as worried about crime or as concerned about criminal justice reform as they are in many other parts of the country. Like literally, Michigan is in a good place when it comes to safety, accountability, and justice. And for some of you who have been in Lansing trying to move criminal justice reform, pretrial reform, second look, juvenile justice reform, It might not feel that way, but at least in the data, you can see, people by and large feel like I like my local legislators, I trust them, and I trust them actually on issues of crime and safety as well. And so, what we've seen in recent media news and other sort of outlets is, things like, as opposed to in a lot of the rest of the country, there's a lot of sort of tough on crime rhetoric and fear mongering about crime. A lot of the recent stories in Michigan have been the fewest homicides since 1966, community partners being selected for CVI contracts, and even bipartisan efforts for reform. That support is still there, even if it doesn't feel like it, it actually is. Our job is to harness it. But at the same time, we've seen statements from everybody from AG Nessel to folks in the state legislature fear-mongering about crime. One bad thing happens or one particular issue gets raised, one particular policy, and you can see the backlash start. So let's turn to the data because it'll help us get a sense of how do we actually grapple with this and respond. So the big takeaway from Michigan's research is Michigan is overall in a good place when it comes to pushing for criminal justice reform, as in Michiganders are with us. The challenges are political class, elected leaders. We need to get them there too. And for one thing, the debate has so often been tough or soft on crime, or there's been nothing about it. What we know Michiganders need to hear from their elected leaders is that they're serious about safety. Not that they're tough on crime, but that they're serious about safety. And that's actually going to be the approach that will protect momentum for justice reform and counter tough on crime backsliding. So in our survey, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the specifics of the survey, the methodology, but this is what really underscores that point of Michiganders are in a good place. It's really about getting the right message. So we ask in the survey, who would you be most likely to vote for? Is it when you hear sort of the typical GOP soft on crime attack? Is it a Democrat who says, no, I also am tough on crime? Or is it a Democrat who says, I'm serious about safety? And we'll get into what those things mean in a second, but I want to start with this data because I actually think it's pretty profound and helpful to sort of put you in the right place. So what we did is, here's the GOP soft on crime attack, and then half of the respondents heard the Democrat saying, no, I too am tough on crime as a response. The other half heard, I'm serious about safety. I'm not going to take the bait on tough or soft on crime. I'm going to get onto my own narrative playing field. And here's what the results were when we asked Michiganders who heard this, who would they vote for? So if they heard a GOP legislator go on the attack, tough on crime rhetoric, and the Democrat said, no, I too am also tough, overall, kind of a split race. 48% of Michiganders would vote for the GOP legislator, 47% would vote for the Democrat who said, I'm also tough. You pull out independent Michiganders, 53 to 39 would vote for the GOP tough on crime candidate. Young voters, which in our survey is 50 and under, so young is a broad term, 43 to 52. White men, 62 to 33. Blue collar, working class voters, 48 to 45. So in general, unless you are looking at relatively young folks, going tough on crime as a Democrat is not going to win you at the ballot booth. So compare that to if a Democrat said, no, I too am serious about safety. Overall, you see 45 to 50. There's a 6 percentage point shift, 5 percentage points ahead of the GOP. Independent voters, a huge swing. 50% of independent Michiganders say, I'd vote for that Democrat who said I'm serious about safety, versus only 40% would vote for the GOP tough on crime candidate. Young voters, you get a huge swing too. They were going to vote Democrat anyway. Now they're really going to vote Democrat. One of the things we've found from this is a serious about safety message is actually energizing. It motivates young voters and Black voters. We see that here. White men, you still lose, but you're losing less badly. And then with working class voters, a 10 percentage point shift, a 16 percentage point shift from -3 to +13. Those are kind of remarkable results. And when we shared this with legislators in Lansing, they were like, say again, really? And we showed them the crosstabs and it's there, it's in the research. And it really says something that I think is not believed until you see it in the numbers. So why does this matter? And it's because, look, So far, at least from our monitoring of the media and the sort of narrative overall around crime and safety in Michigan races, it's been relatively quiet. There hasn't been as many snipes on sort of tough or soft on crime. There's some, notable exceptions to that. We talked to Representative Fink, who was like, I was just in an awful race where that was like the entire narrative. But by and large, it hasn't really come up that much. It is coming for Michigan. And I say this because Wisconsin, your neighbor, back in 2022, Mandela Barnes running for US Senate, attacked for being quote unquote soft on crime, similar to all the Fetterman attacks that I just talked about earlier. Unlike John Fetterman, Mandela Barnes didn't really respond to the attacks. He sort of ran away from them, talked about abortion more, and he lost by 1 percentage point. When we look at the exit surveys of voters who said crime was my top voting issue, he lost by over 20 percentage points. You wonder if he had met that moment, met the attacks, had a serious about safety message, whether he could have won. And this is what's likely coming for Michigan in 2024. Nobody in Wisconsin in 2022 thought over $14 million of national money was going to come into the state with tough on crime rhetoric and soft on crime attacks, but here we are. And so really it's a heads up for Michigan to say, this is coming and it's better to be ready, it's better to get out on front, and here's the strategy for doing so. So I feel like I've already covered this. I'm gonna skip this slide, but just again, talked a lot about 2022 and how it's a precursor for what we think is happening in 2024. What we know is 157 million was spent overall across the country on soft on crime attacks, tough on crime rhetoric. We know at least that amount of money, if not more, is going to be spent in 2024. So here's the Michigan polling. It's a 20-minute statewide poll, about 800 Michigan voters. And we wanted to understand their views on crime and how this issue impacts their vote. And it's at the 95% confidence interval, a 3.5% margin of error. So the demographics of our respondents essentially mirror the state in terms of ideology, age, gender, educational background, and then partisanship, how people identify on the voter rolls. And we broke out our data. This is how our consultants organized it. I don't know that I would necessarily organize it this way, but you all know Michigan far better than I do. But you can see we broke out, Detroit and Wayne County, broke out sort of the Upper Peninsula, the more rural parts of the state, as well as parts of the state that are consultants called sort of upwardly mobile, some of the sort of, the suburbs, as well as some of the more working class communities. And so we can pull out these crosstabs for folks. I know people on this call are from around the state and happy to actually pull out data from your specific district or part of the state. So I'm going to share a couple of quick lessons from the research. The first one is Michiganders, like I said, are in a better place around crime and safety, but that doesn't mean, first of all, that they're not concerned about crime. If you ask people how much of an issue is crime to you, I think all of us would say at least somewhat of an issue. Like, we all want to be safe. It doesn't matter where we are on the political spectrum, where we live, who we are, we all want safety. But concern about crime doesn't equal support for more tough on crime policies. And so here's what we see. In our survey, we asked, how serious of a problem is crime in Michigan? And you'll see overall, 87% said very serious or somewhat serious. If you pull out Black voters, 92% said very serious or somewhat serious. White voters, it's 86%. And that actually tracks with what we have seen if we ask this question a different way, which is how big of a problem is crime, not just in general in the state or in general in the country, but where you live in your neighborhood. Black voters are much more likely than white voters to say crime is actually a big problem in my community, in my neighborhood. And so that's the next slide. We asked again, how big of a problem is crime in your neighborhood? 43% said, I agree or strongly agree that crime is a serious problem in my community. Of Black voters, almost 60% said that. White voters, it goes down to 41%. The differential there of who experiences crime and has concerns about violence is really significant. That said, when you ask people, do you support tough on crime policies versus a serious about safety approach? here's what we find. So this is where we define what tough on crime and serious about safety is. So we asked survey respondents, if you had to pick an approach to public safety, which one aligns more with your views? Is it getting tough on crime, like having tougher sentences for people convicted of violent crimes, maintaining strong bail laws to keep potentially dangerous people in jail, providing police more support and resources, or is it being serious about safety, which means we're fully funding the things that create safe communities, improve people's quality of life, like good schools, a living wage, affordable housing, and do more to prevent crime by increasing treatment for mental health and drug addiction and getting illegal guns off the street. So you can see across the state, 57% of Michiganders said, I prefer a serious about safety approach. Only 40% said tough on crime. You pull out Black voters, the voters who are 20 percentage points more likely to say I'm worried about crime in my neighborhood where I live. 80% prefer a serious about safety approach over tough on crime. Even white voters, which includes a lot of conservative as well as moderate, independent Michiganders, 53 to 45 prefer a serious about safety approach. And when you pull that out and you look at the demographics differently, Democrats, independent voters in Michigan, independent Michiganders, 59 to 37 say, I prefer a serious about safety approach over tough on crime. You can see that's true for working class voters. Importantly, it's also true for rural Michiganders. If you pull out rural, rest of the state, 50 to 47. Like, that's actually pretty exciting to see, and it means you're at least breaking even, if not coming out ahead. Again, younger people way ahead. Even with older Michiganders, you see pulls out even. Again, white women, and we've seen this trend in all of our research, are much more likely to favor a safety approach than a tough on crime one. You see that here. So lesson 2 is part of the problem is silence. And so, the vacuum in a message of serious about safety allows it to get filled with tough on crime rhetoric and that Democrats are soft on crime. And so leaning into safety early and often, it builds upon existing advantages that in fact both parties have with Michigan voters. And so we asked this question in our survey, how much do you hear from each party about crime? And this was a remarkable sort of result. We've done this testing nationally. We've done it in a bunch of different states. Most places you see people say, I hear so much more from Republicans than I do from Democrats. In Michigan, what we saw is that people have heard sort of similarly in terms of, yes, I've heard a lot or some. When asked, how much have you heard from Democrats on crime and making communities safe? 74% said, I've heard some, a moderate amount. 76% said the same from Republicans. Where there's a difference, though, is in the intensity. You can see 20% said, I hear a lot from Republicans. Only 12% said, I hear a lot from Democrats. And then about a quarter of folks say, I don't hear much at all. But the thing that's really exciting about this is like there isn't the same sort of like confidence gap or deficit that Democrats have compared to Republicans on this issue in most parts of the country. Actually, Michiganders think both parties are talking about the issue, talking about a concern they have. And so we asked this question a different way, is who do you trust more on reducing crime and making communities safer? And again, the difference isn't that great. You might expect it to be bigger. Certainly when you go to Lansing and you feel like you're having a hard time moving Democratic legislators, it might feel bigger. But in fact, the results for Michiganders are 43% say they trust Democrats strongly, or somewhat strongly, and 49% say they trust Republicans strongly or somewhat strongly. And again, you can see the breakdown by different demographics. So the third lesson here is, we know actually the politics are not bad for us on moving issues of safety and justice. And what we see that is when we ask about policy solutions, Michiganders want prevention and treatment solutions over more tough on crime. And so we asked this question, what extent, if at all, do you believe the following proposals will decrease crime in Michigan? Each of them, you sort of rate how likely do you think it is to impact crime. The most effective policy for decreasing crime in Michigan, according to Michigan voters, is stop the flow of drugs, including meth, opioids, and fentanyl into Michigan communities. And then close second is increased funding for mental health and drug treatment programs. And a close second behind that is fully fund the things that prevent crime, such as affordable housing, mental health and drug treatment, and access to good jobs. And then you start to get to some of the tough on crime stuff, stricter penalties for people who commit violent crimes, reducing the number of legal guns available, enforced bail laws that keep people who pose a danger to their community in jail. And then you can see even stuff like deploying trained specialists to respond to mental health crisis situations. 41% of Michiganders say, I think that would have an impact on decreasing crime. Now, even when it comes to the sticky stuff, police and policing, we know the defund attacks are often potent. We can see here, even still, you don't have to go to, no, I want to fund the police, or I support the police, or we need to put more police on the streets. When we ask this question, this holds up everywhere we poll it. What do you want to see from your elected leaders when it comes to policing? 31% of Michiganders, so by far the greatest number, say we need to support police who put their lives on the line for us every day and hold those who use excessive force or abuse their power accountable. Black voters, white voters, both say that to a significant degree. And then you can see putting more police on the streets or more funding for police comes way behind at 12% of voters say that would actually be the thing I want to hear. Now, look, not everybody is going to talk about policing. This is polling and messaging guidance that we've prepared really for legislators. Like, what do you say to them when you know they are going to talk about something? But I think this is really important for all of us to know and be aware of, that actually when it comes to policing, it's not more police or more funding for police, it's actually better policing and more accountable policing that folks want. And that's a really important message for legislators to hear when the debate about policing and defund and money for police comes up. Now, another really important lesson from the research is, how do we talk about accountability? And, we tested some policy proposals that we know are on the table in Lansing that folks on this call and others are really pushing for, and tried to test that to see in a head-to-head message test, how do they perform when we own accountability? We make accountability not just be about punishment, but about repair and behavior change. And it turns out it works really well. Michiganders want more than a punishment-only approach. So here's the head-to-head message test we did. We asked survey respondents, when it comes to accountability, do you think that people, if they do the crime, they should have to do the time? So here's what that looks like. Some say crime is out of control. We need to make sure that people who break the law are held accountable by enforcing strict punishments. If you do the crime, you should do the time. That means serving the full sentence. Offenders shouldn't be able to get out of jail or prison early simply because they complete programs or have a good track record behind bars. That's the opposition we've heard to essentially the good time early release policies that are pending in Lansing. We compared that to a safety and justice message, which is this. Some say crime is out of control, and to make communities safe, people who break the law must be held accountable. And this means seeing the harm they've done, accepting the consequences, learning from mistakes, and changing their behavior. Harsh punishment and long sentences alone lead to more violence. We need to provide people with programs that work to turn their lives around and prevent future crime. So it turns out, overall, across Michigan, 54 to 43 say, I'd take the safety and justice approach to accountability over the do the crime, do the time approach. Black voters, 70 to 28. Even white voters, 51 to 46. So we've tested this now a bunch of different ways. Head-to-head message test of serious about safety versus tough on crime. Head-to-head message test of a safety and justice accountability message versus a do the crime, do the time accountability message. We keep getting the same results. Now, the other thing we tested is, how does this play out when there's a partisan messenger, a Republican candidate, a Democrat candidate? Turns out still plays out just fine. So first of all, sort of the serious about safety message is what you own on the offense. Like, this is how a candidate can define themselves. This is how legislators can talk about these issues, say we can have safety, accountability, and justice. I'm serious about safety. But even when facing attacks, which is where we often see our elected leaders or candidates stumble, you can lean in with a serious about safety message, and it beats I too am tough on crime. So here's how we did it. And we actually put partisan messengers in, so a GOP candidate versus a Democrat. And then here's the head-to-head that we did. So All of the respondents heard the GOP soft on crime attack. Republicans are tackling crime, protecting law-abiding Michiganders. They'll stop the revolving door for criminals, make sure criminals serve their full sentence, and force prosecutors to prosecute all cases, big and small. Republicans will back the blue by increasing police funding and putting more officers on the street. Unlike Democrats who support soft on crime policies like eliminating cash bail and releasing violent criminals from prison early, Republicans will restore law and order to stop crime. So survey respondents heard that. Then half of them heard the Democrat, I too am tough on crime. Half of them heard a Democrat saying, I'm serious about safety. Here's what those messages were. The I too am tough on crime is Democrats will restore law and order to Michigan's communities. Addressing crime means getting illegal guns off the street, improving police response times, and solving serious crime. Democrats will add more funding for police, crack down on violent criminals, and go after the worst offenders by imposing stricter sentences. Unlike Republicans who talk a big game but oppose common sense gun safety laws, Democrats know what works to be both tough and smart on crime. We lifted these from actual candidate platforms, by the way. Then we had a Democrat, I am serious about safety. Here's the message. Democrats will make Michigan's communities safer, preventing crime before it happens by investing in schools, housing, and mental health and addiction programs. Addressing violent crime means getting illegal guns off the street, improving police response times, and solving serious crime. Democrats support police who put their lives on the line, but also hold them accountable for abuse. Unlike Republicans who oppose programs that prevent crime and common sense gun laws, Democrats have solutions that work to make every neighborhood safe. Then again, we asked people, you hear both of these statements, who do you agree with more? And you can see when it's the GOP attack and Democrats are also tough, Democrats are down by 1 percentage point, among independent voters down 9 percentage points. Young voters who are more likely to vote Democrat, they're up 10, behind 30 percentage points with white men, up 4 percentage points with working class voters. If respondents here, Democrats say I'm serious about safety, go up overall 1 percentage point. With independent voters, you actually make up that negative 9 percentage point deficit, you're up 1. Young voters, you still remain well ahead. Again, you lose less badly with white men, and you hold blue collar and working class voters the same. So how does this all look when you sort of put it together and like actually test this out in sort of a real election cycle and not just in the test tube of research? And so I'm going to share, and this is going back to our other research, a lesson from Virginia and an exit poll that we did in the Virginia election cycle that was November 2023. And this was a race, it was all state legislative races where 25 million was spent by the GOP attacking Democrats for being quote unquote soft on crime. And Democrats by and large did what Democrats often do. They sort of either ran away and didn't address the issue, or they said, I too am tough on crime. We did an exit survey in Virginia after all of that, to actually see how would a serious about safety message have moved voters if they heard it. And so let me see where the ad is. It's right there. So here's what we did is we showed respondents in our Virginia poll 3 ads. One is a GOP candidate touting more funding for police and a tough on crime approach. The second one was a typical Democrat ad when being attacked for defunding the police. It talked about support for police, police endorsements, and gun control, because that's a safe place that Democrats often go. And then the third one was the ad that we mocked up, the Democrats are serious about safety and solutions ad. Now let me actually show you the ad, because I think you can all imagine the GOP tough on crime ad. It is a version of what we just saw right at the beginning of this. I'm sure you actually can imagine the Democrats saying, no, I too am tough on crime. But here's what a serious about safety message looks like.
Keeping you and your family safe. Nothing's more important. We all deserve leaders who are serious about safety. Democrats work to prevent crime before it happens, not just react after, with real solutions to stop the violence and respond to crises. Promoting gun safety, treating addiction, and breaking the cycle of crime. Sending a trained specialist to people in mental health crises. Supporting the police to solve serious crime. Safety, accountability, and justice, because Democrats are serious about safety and solutions.
Okay, so how does that all perform? 3 ads, we asked respondents which ad is most aligned with your views. Overall, 34% of Virginia respondents said the serious about safety ad is the one that aligns most with my views. outperforming ad number 2, the Democrat, saying, I will fund the police, I support the police and gun safety by 8 percentage points. You can see with independent voters, it held 29%. Young voters outperformed 37%. And then here's where it gets really interesting is with Black voters, we saw it way outperform the other 2 ads. 47% of Black voters said that ad is most aligned with my views. In the qualitative open-end responses, we found it's because this ad actually speaks to sort of crime overall, all of my concerns about being safe, and they didn't name it as this, but it was clear, and it has things that we feel gets at the root causes of crime, i.e. justice reform. And so it's a really good reminder that owning safety and justice and having a message that owns all of it is actually going to hold with independent voters. It's going to turn out young voters. It's really going to turn out Black voters. Now, just in case you think, well, Virginia doesn't necessarily feel like Michigan, it's a very purple state in the way that Michigan is a very purple state. And in case you think maybe Virginia voters are just a unique set of voters, we actually pulled out the data on Virginia's independent voters that was in the survey. And we asked them, which party do you trust more on issues of crime and safety? You can see independent voters had more trust for Republicans. That holds up sort of everywhere that we asked this question. Not a huge gap, but 14 percentage point gap. And then we asked the same question, do you prefer an approach that's serious about safety or tough on crime? The exact same thing that you saw in Michigan. And then with those independent voters, even though they say, I trust the GOP, a little more on their handling of crime and safety than Democrats, I would take that serious about safety approach 61 to 39, like literally by a 20 percentage point gap, independent voters are going for serious about safety. And this is voters who just went to the ballot box, heard a lot about crime, like had the full on tough on crime treatment and are still saying serious about safety is the message that resonates more for me. And then again, we asked that question about what do you want to hear from candidates when it comes to policing? The idea of supporting police, but also holding them accountable if they abuse their power or break the law, outperforms putting more police on the streets or more funding for police across all voters, but especially independent voters and Democratic voters. So again, this holds up, and I think it's so important to sort of look at real results and learn from it and say, what can we do in Michigan? So here's the quick version of sort of when you own safety, you own accountability, you own justice, what do you say? So safety is real solutions that work to prevent crime, respond to crisis, and stop violence. We've tested that in focus groups and all of this research. That is the triplet that performs really well to name what safety is and what we have to own. Accountability is personal responsibility. It's about repair and changing behavior, not just punishment. It's simple, it's clear, it gets us out of the you don't care about personal responsibility, you want a free-for-all, and it owns accountability, but owns accountability on our terms. Then justice. Justice is a system that works for all by relying less on incarceration and more on the things proven to help communities thrive. You can name it, say we can incarcerate less, we can invest in communities more, and that actually resonates for voters. So that is a lot of information I just threw at you all. I would love to hear reactions, questions, things you want to dig into. I can put the slides back up, but wanted to share all of that because for me, again, like I said at the beginning of this, I think this is really heartening because it feels like there is a messaging path forward. We've got good policy. We know what it takes to end mass incarceration. But I know that at least for me as an advocate, I've often struggled with the messaging, and I hope this really gives sort of a path forward of how do you message on these tough issues. And so can I go ahead and just ask people to jump in? Simone, I see your hand raised. Please jump in.
I do want to thank you for the entire presentation. I thought it was all incredibly helpful. And I also can relate to a lot of the struggles that you mentioned. I'm sure a lot of the folks on this call can too, that when things are going well, you feel good about the messaging. When they're not going well, it's, oh, that was the wrong messaging. One of the things that I think is the most interesting and important and hard is you were touching on it, I think, really early in the presentation about where voters are versus where elected officials are, and how there is this gap very oftentimes. And then the question is okay, well, who do we focus on? Who are we trying to get to? We're trying to get to the people who can say yes, or we're trying to get to the public. And I don't know if there's anything that we can infer deeper from that, but I was just wondering if you could elaborate more on that.
So we've done over 100 briefings and presentations to campaigns and candidates and legislators. And every single time they're really surprised by this because they feel like the tough on crime rhetoric that they hear around the state house or that they hear on the campaign trail must be what voters want. And it's actually really helpful, I think, for legislators to show them the research and be like, look, if you're surprised by this, so am I. But here's why that is because so much of what our perception is that like the tough on crime rhetoric works, it comes from like the political ads, it comes from the media coverage, but it's actually not reflective of where everyday people are. And everyday people shape their opinions based on like their neighborhoods they live in, what they see every day, the conversations they have. So just take it apart a little bit and bring sort of our legislators and candidates in to be like, this is surprising to me, and I bet it's surprising to you, as opposed to be like, why don't you see what your constituents want, which none of us would do. But I actually think the sort of like bringing in, sharing, saying, isn't this surprising, but this is in fact true, and asking them, because all of them are going to be candidates again at some point, to say, when you do your own polling, try this, like see if it bears out, and it will, because we've literally polled this 6 ways to Sunday all across the country for 2 years, and that will give them, you know, the sort of confidence they need to believe like actually this works. We've just never asked these questions before in all of our polling or how we've approached issues of crime and safety.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that great question.